Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. And in particular, we have been focusing in on a collector's set, a box set, a physical media Blu-ray set that was released by Criterion a few weeks back. It is a really excellent set for a number of reasons, one of which being the films that are included. It is this set right here, which has been given as a set whole, SPY number 1103. It is this set called Once Upon a Time in China, the Complete Films. And today I'd like to focus in on a film that is from 1993, and the director is Yuen Bun, and the name of the work is Once Upon a Time in China 4. This is the work from 1993, and it is from Choi Huk, who serves as producer or co-producer, also screenwriter or co-screenwriter. The director here is Yuen Bun, and also serving as martial arts director for this film. And Yuen Bun's name has appeared before as far as the martial arts choreography is concerned for the previous work, Once Upon a Time in China 3, but this time he serves as director for this particular film, which stars, among others, in its really interesting cast, Vincent Zhao as Wang Feihong, also Jean Wang as the 14th aunt, as well as Max Mok and Xiang Xinxing and Lao Shun and others. This is the work, and please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation, but this is Wang Feihong Zise Wang Zifeng, or in English, Once Upon a Time in China 4. Now, before I go into any specifics as far as the plot is concerned, I should say that from the outset, I consider one of the great strengths of this particular Criterion Blu-ray set to be the inclusion of the films Once Upon a Time in China 4 and Once Upon a Time in China 5. In the context of the cycle of films that we have come to know in English as Once Upon a Time in China, the series or cycle of films revolving around this legend, iconic character, Wang Feihong, this time portrayed by Vincent Zhao. So it's really wonderful to have it here as part of this collection in terms of this presentation, etc. Again, Once Upon a Time in China 4. Before we get into any more discussions about this film in the context of the series and the presentation in terms of this Criterion set, let us focus briefly on the plot or story of the film Once Upon a Time in China 4. And I think in this discussion we can also see just how well it fits into the overall series, while also maybe establishing its own, say, existence or its own character through various modes and methods or means, among which being, for example, its casting and the way in which it is relying on these various actors or performers, including, of course, Vincent Zhao as Wang Feihong. But first, let's focus in on the plot or story, which we understand involves the storyline which we last saw in Once Upon a Time in China 3 with a certain group of the Po Chi Lam circle, of course led by Wang Feihong, in Beijing due to certain circumstances in regards to Once Upon a Time in China 3. And here we have a further, let's say, elongation or a further, say, development of certain themes of intrigue and suspense, and say sort of the type of international types of scandal or treachery or struggle, which is this time placed in the context of what one can understand to be the Eight-Nation Alliance, and also in line with or coinciding with the history of China at the turn of the century, involving, for example, the Boxer militia, or the Boxer rebellion element. Now, these elements, I think, are very important, not just in the context of Qing Dynasty, turn of the century Chinese history, but also as it plays out in the context of Once Upon a Time in China for the storyline. And thus, this forms, I think, a lovely foundational link with the other films in the Once Upon a Time in China series, in the way in which it is seemingly treating or handling or having a discussion about history, while at the same time being an incredibly entertaining action-adventure film epic, involving, of course, at the center of it, the martial arts exploration and representation and a type of expression, physical and spiritual and emotional expression of this martial arts philosophy, in the form of the character of Wang Feihong. So in this very general statement, if you will, I think we can see, therefore, this film figuring in so smoothly and so comfortably with the series writ large. And so going into this particular theme or backdrop, we understand that Wang Feihong is now embroiled or involved in this type of struggle. On the one hand, we have this type of international scene that is being set in terms of an internationally based lion dance festival competition. And of course, we know that Wang Feihong in the previous film, Once Upon a Time in China 3, enjoyed a certain degree of success in that film's lion dance competition context. And so from that particular storyline, we get his fame in the lion dance arena. This time now he is asked to somehow perform or contribute to this lion dance performance, this time in the international context. And this international context is also, we understand later, to be related quite directly to this notion or concept or event or set of events at the turn of century Chinese history known as the Eight Nation Alliance. And so this idea of the struggle for some kind of control or sort of military dominance vis-a-vis China and the outside world. Here we have maybe steps or series of plot entanglements leading up to particular events involving that particular historical backdrop. Again, that lead up or build up being this backdrop of this lion dance festival. So in this way, we see, I think from the outset or almost immediately, the way in which this film, Once Upon a Time in China 4, seems to be maybe duplicating or replicating certain elements that we have seen from past films, while arguably at the same time treating them from a certain point of view anyway, a different perspective. So what do I mean by this? So for instance, let's take this lion dance aspect. We have seen arguably the lion dance component expressed in certain areas here and there in, say, Once Upon a Time in China, or Once Upon a Time in China 2. And indeed, we have seen the lion dance placed with a great deal of primary importance in the context of the plot of Once Upon a Time in China 3. So in that way, one can see the implementation of the lion dance aspect in Once Upon a Time in China 4 to be perhaps replicating or duplicating, or perhaps viewed in, say, a slightly more negative connotation, maybe derivative of something that we've seen, say, in Once Upon a Time in China 3. If that's one's viewpoint, of course, I think that's a very reasonable viewpoint to have. However, I would also point out that while there are some certain points of duplication that could be said to be part of this makeup of this film, at the same time, what's intriguing about this film's use of the lion dance component is, as I was mentioning earlier, the way in which it seems to be linking it to the international setting quite directly. We have the participants, the various, say, teams or groups of involvement from different nations, different parties around the world, and this in turn leads to a type of very militarily based or violent based struggle or confrontation set quite directly in the context of the lion dance performance or component, which then leads into, as I say, the historical context and backdrop of the Eight Nation Alliance historical events from the turn of the century. So in that way, this lion dance component is therefore linking directly to specific aspects of turn of the century Chinese history, and also at the same time it maintains a sense of a vivid and dynamic direct expression of this notion of the martial arts philosophy that we know has been espoused by Wang Feihong, not only in the cinematic version of Wang Feihong that we have seen in this cycle of films, but also in the actual historical persona, the historical figure of Wang Feihong and his approach to martial arts philosophy, including the way in which lion dance performances form a very strong backbone or backdrop to that particular approach to physical and spiritual unity in terms of the martial arts of Wang Feihong. So that lion dance component, it might be said to be repeated, but in fact it is very integral to the Wang Feihong legend, as well as being a key component to the plot of this film, which links to a specific aspect of history, which arguably has not necessarily been directly dealt with in the prior films, while at the same time providing a sense of continuity, because, as I say, we have seen the lion dance element expressed in various forms, including Part 3 in the past films. So it's doing a lot of things at once, which I think is one of the really interesting aspects of this particular work, Once Upon a Time in China 4, and that's one of the arguments, I would say, that makes this film an integral part of the series as a whole. Now, another way in which this film operates in that type of similar, or that type of vein or similar vein, is the introduction of the Red Lantern sect. And this is the other key component of the plot of this film, Once Upon a Time in China 4, namely the Red Lantern sect being this group of it's described in one of the essays here as being a group of female warriors, or people that are committed to the notion of a type of nationalistic protection of certain ideals of Chinese identity. And that leads to certain aspects of this Red Lantern sect attacking, creating chaos, and creating certain situations of violence and attack against what they perceive to be outside external non-Chinese influences and certain groups that are represented in the film. So it's often described, therefore, as perhaps a xenophobic group or cult that could be said also to be very much in parallel with what we saw in, say, Once Upon a Time in China 2, in that film being the White Lotus sect or group, serving a similar type of function, in fact almost an identical type of function in terms of the way in which that group seemed to be lashing out against various foreign elements that were introduced directly into the plot. Here the function seems to be the same or quite similar in terms of how there are certain attacks against certain foreign elements that are integral to the very specific plot steps along the way. Of course, there are certain differences that also emerge in terms of the treatment of this type of element, one being the way in which Wang Feihong interacts with this group, the Red Lantern group. They are female, and so there is this also sense of maybe Wang Feihong, do they see him as an enemy? Do they see him as an ally? This also serves to function as a role or means by which we can also see Wang Feihong's struggle in terms of how his character is viewing outside influence, the foreign influence on the one hand, and trying his best to either reject or to accept to a certain degree those sorts of influences, technology, the way in which maybe military influence can be maybe unavoidable from his eyes, while at the same time trying to adapt or adjust while still maintaining a sense of fidelity or faithfulness to what one might perceive to be a sense of a national identity or truth of self, etc., as expressed through the martial arts philosophy. So on the one hand, Wang Feihong as a character all the way through the cycle of films, including this film, seems to be expressing that type of struggle. Well, we see that struggle, I think, directly head on in terms of how the Red Lantern sect struggles, or how his relationship with the Red Lantern sect, certain elements of it anyway, is on the one hand maybe antagonistic, while on the same time certain elements might be said to be very much in terms of a type of an alliance, and it really depends on the dynamic of a particular scene. And so that type of, say, confusion, or that type of a possible change at any moment, the shifting alliances, as it were, I think adds to that ever engaging element of these films, namely the continuing struggle of Wang Feihong and his approach to various, say, viewpoints of the diplomatic and political and social scene of the time, namely how to deal with the outside influences while still trying to maintain a sense of Chinese fidelity to oneself. And so that is the struggle. And we see that struggle played out in very direct terms, and oftentimes very violent terms, and very dynamic, action-oriented terms, in terms of the struggles between certain characters of the Red Lantern sect on the one hand, and also certain characters outside of that sect on the other hand. And that in turn leads to various clashes that also form the action-adventure set pieces that form the backdrop of this really remarkable work. Now throw into the mix there this idea of say, non-Chinese characters that are, as I say, the target of the certain attacks from this Red Lantern sect, while at the same time the film presents some of these characters, especially some characters that are, say, religious in nature. Maybe they are more friendly than the Red Lantern sect people might have us to believe. So that adds a certain mix or a certain nuance to the equation, as it were, that we have seen also in past films. Namely, it is not simply a case that things that are portrayed as being outside influence are automatically labeled as being quote-unquote bad or villainous, or vice versa. In other words, there's always nuance. There's always a type of maybe complex, nuanced relationship, and that there is always a sense of balance, or maybe there is a type of negative traits, but also potentially positive traits. There are also benefits. There are also people who are also very willing to listen and to talk and also to respect others. And so this type of attitude is expressed in certain of the new characters that we meet along the way. And this also is a reminder of that type of blend of a type of respect or mutual respect towards these otherwise quote-unquote outside influences that we have also seen throughout the entire series of films. We have seen it maybe most primarily in the way in which the character of 13th Aunt was always treated and handled in terms of her background and her education abroad. And she brings with her a fascination and also respect for, say, outside technology, the camera being the very big symbol, while at the same time she's also respectful and indeed very dedicated, both emotionally and also familially with Po Chi Lam and in particular Wang Feihong. So that type of blend of nuance in painting a picture where things are not necessarily always good or always bad, but there are always positive points and negative points to be brought out from both sides. I think this is part of the landscape or trajectory of these films, and it's certainly present here in this film, Once Upon a Time in China 4. Now, I've mentioned that there are certain similarities that we have seen, for instance, the use of this Red Lantern sect, which could be said to be mirroring the White Lotus group in the second film, or the use of the lion dance aspect of the plot, which is reminiscent of part 3. But also, at the same time, there are arguably a number of differences that we see, which I think are really striking in terms of how this film seems to be standing apart from the films that came before it. And I think this comes primarily from the fact that we understand that this is a film that stars Vincent Zhao as Wang Feihong. And this is very noticeable because, of course, one of the great strengths and selling points of the earlier films, 1, 2, and 3, is one of the great points of those films is arguably the performance of Jet Li as Wang Feihong. And so now we have a new actor filling in the shoes or filling in this role. And so it is quite, at least to my eyes, it is a very different type of performance. It is, he looks different. He has a different type of demeanor. Vincent Zhao does. But when I say different, I don't mean necessarily negative. On the contrary, I think his performance, while different, is very vivid, very exciting, very dynamic. The film itself announces at the very outset in the in the opening credits, it announces Vincent Zhao as Wang Feihong, and so it embraces his particular performance. There is information throughout this particular set, in the essay, for instance, in certain supplements, as to why Jet Li didn't appear in 4 and 5. And so if you want to have more information about that, you can look, for instance, at these particular parts of the supplements or essay. But in any event, we do have Vincent Zhao. And I think that, his performance is electrifying. His physical prowess is remarkable. It is so brilliant. He has a certain command of his body. He has a certain way of movement. It is lightning fast, an incredible speed with which he's able to carry himself. And so this is Wang Feihong that has a certain quickness, that has a certain sense of maybe urgency, that is also, I think, very much guided along. And this forms a certain type of, and it's an interesting point too, because while there's a certain difference in a type of maybe approach or look or maybe aesthetic feel, there is also a sense of continuity, at least in terms of the way in which the past films oftentimes, or in a lot of ways, depicted Wang Feihong almost as a type of maybe naive character. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean in terms of how he approaches new things. He approaches new things with a sense of, say, innocent curiosity. And I think that component is carried through quite nicely in the performance of Vincent Zhao. He seems to be reacting to things in a way that really captures a sense of the innocence that he has in terms of viewing new things, which I like that line of continuity, while at the same time giving us a certain type of sharpness and quickness and agility in terms of the movement and the way he approaches things. It's a type of no-nonsense approach and feel and style, which I think is a really exciting, really dynamic. I love Jet Li's performance, don't get me wrong, but here is another angle, here's another interpretation of Wang Feihong, which I think is really, really exciting. And so it should be welcome, but I think. And also it reminds us too that Wang Feihong as a character throughout the history of cinema, the 20th century, has been depicted by more than one actor. And so this is in many ways a continuation of that particular tradition in cinema, that is a depiction of Wang Feihong by another actor in a series, or in the great tradition of the many actors who have been portraying Wang Feihong in one form or another. So here is yet another example of that. So in that way, I think having that particular aspect of this film on display, as it were, I think is very welcome, and it is very consistent with, as I say, the way in which the Wang Feihong character has been portrayed in many examples in cinema past. And I think it is further helped, actually, by the introduction of Jean Wang's character, the 14th aunt. We no longer have 13th aunt. She is conspicuously absent from these proceedings, and perhaps that could be seen as one of the weaknesses of the film. I love 13th aunt as a character. She's one of my favorite characters. Rosamund Kwan is so wonderful in the role. So she is, of course, very missed in terms of Once Upon a Time in China 4, no doubt about it. But I think Jean Wang as 14th aunt in a role that is perhaps arguably a role itself that maybe has within it certain limitations in terms of where it could possibly go. I think she does a really marvelous job in capturing a type of energy and a spirited nature of 14th aunt. And also too, it really is nice because I really like the type of chemistry that is had between Wang Feihong as portrayed by Vincent Zhao and 14th aunt as portrayed by Jean Wang. I really do like their chemistry. I think it works very well. And in fact, that's a really interesting point that we can return to when we talk about Once Upon a Time in China 5, in terms of the chemistry vis-a-vis the various characters, including 13th aunt, and again, we'll talk about that when we talk about Once Upon a Time in China 5. But I think my point here is that the introduction of the 14th aunt character, I think, helps to ease in the transition of this new actor portraying Wang Feihong, because, as I say, one of the key relationships, the 13th aunt relationship with Wang Feihong, I think would have made it maybe more noticeable, that the fact that we had a different actor. But the fact that now we have 14th Aunt as part of that relationship, even though it is still a new relationship in our eyes, I think it really helps to ease in the transition. But at the same time, the film needs to maintain a sense of continuity. And it does so with the various other characters in the circle. So we have Clubfoot, we have Long Fun, and also you have Wang Keiying, who are there to provide a certain sense of continuity. And their presence is always very welcome to see, in particular, that relationship dynamic, Long Fun, Clubfoot, and Wang Feihong. I think it works really well. And in fact, that type of dynamic is, there's a type of limitless, boundless energy that they seem to be having, the Pochi Lam group. And so it's really, I think it's lovely to see Vincent Zhao ease into that and really fit in to that type of chemistry between and among these comrades. Really, really work very well. So that group dynamic, it remains intact, and it still carries through. And that's one of the strengths of this film, or these films, in fact, is how strong that group dynamic is between these and among these allies. And I think Vincent Zhao really fits into that so well, and the continuity remains. And it's also helped along by the great performances by Max Mokin, Xiang Xinqing, and Lao Shun, and others. So that is another source of continuity, while at the same time supporting or buttressing the various changes that are occurring within Once Upon a Time in China 4. I should say, too, that I think also it's been marked upon that the fact that we have Choi Hawk not being the director, we have Yuen Bun serving as director, I think perhaps has been remarked upon as being maybe one of the reasons why this film, Once Upon a Time in China 4, has perhaps been seen, at least up to now, from some circles at least, to be maybe not part of what has often been marketed as being the trilogy, Once Upon a Time in China 1, 2, and 3. And so for that, and for the reason of a new actor playing the role of Wang Feihong, and other reasons, maybe this film, Once Upon a Time in China 4, has perhaps not been regarded always as being part of the legacy of this work. However, I should point out once again, we should be reminded that Yuen Bun does have a certain continuity because of his connection with Once Upon a Time in China 3. There is there's this way that Yuen Bun is connected with the world of Beijing opera and music, as Maggie Lee's essay points out. And so there's this idea of continuity in terms of performance and opera, and also martial arts and the craft of the physical expression. And so, and the way in which that type of physicality has been expressed in a very vivid, almost a wonderfully entertaining, frenzied way that we saw starting in the third film, and it's continued on in part 4 in this way. And I must say that the action set pieces are really remarkable and highly stylized. There's a way, again, because of the character continuity, there's a sense of continuity and connectivity with the other past films, but at the same time, the feeling and style feels vivid and its own thing. And so I really admire that as far as the way in which Yuen Bun seems to be handling the situation accordingly. So that is, I think, a real standout part of this film. So that's one way the film stands out on its own, while at the same time arguably creating a sense of continuity. So in many respects, despite the fact that Choi Hawk is not the director per se, despite the fact that we have a new actor as Wang Feihong, despite the fact that we have 14th Aunt as a new character here, despite the fact that there are certain elements that might seem to be repeating certain points that we have seen in past films, this film, Once Upon a Time in China 4, also arguably stands on its own in a very strong way. And also those points of repeating can arguably said also to be points of continuity. In other words, it stands on its own while at the same time pointing towards or building upon or re-examining those themes or concerns that we saw in the past works, while at the same time, I think, linking to very specific points of turn-of-the-century Chinese history, namely the Eight Nation Alliance historical details, as well as the Boxer Rebellion, Boxer Militia details as expressed through the Red Lantern sect storyline example, etc., as well as figuring into this conversation, this ongoing conversation between modernity and tradition, between outside influence and inside or domestic or national type of identity or identification. And in that mix, we have sort of the benefits and also the drawbacks of this type of outside influence. Also, the influence or the role of technology, military technology, as well as other certain advancements of the Industrial Revolution and other types of technological advancements that lead into a type of meta discussion of the role of cinema and the like. And that meta discussion too links to the idea of these films not just having a purpose of being storylines that are set within the context of, say, late 19th century, turn of the century, 20th century, turn of the century Chinese Qing dynasty politics and history, but also have links to the present and the current situation. Once again, this is a film that was made and released in the early 90s, 1993, and so there is undoubtedly in the air this idea, especially from the viewpoint and context of Hong Kong audiences, this idea in the air of the approaching year of 1997, what that will mean in terms of self-identity and vis-a-vis the outside, as it were, what that will mean in terms of certain changes along the way. So always there's this conversation of the context of outside influence versus interior viewpoints, and what it will mean in terms of where we are now versus where we will be a few years from now, and the unknowns and the uncertainties. There are certainly a number of uncertainties and unknowns as expressed in Once Upon a Time in China 4. Believe me, there are. In fact, one might look at those unknowns and uncertainties in the context of this film as being a type of almost nihilistic viewpoint of the world in terms of the inexorable trajectory of history and the role of China vis-a-vis the outside world, and maybe the certain losses that might be said to be occurring along the way. Again, this is in terms of the backdrop of history. But at the same time, there is a sense of vigor and excitement because, as always, we have at the center of these proceedings the great legend and character and truly charismatic figure of Wang Feiheng. This time in the form and the performance of Vincent Zhao, but it is so electrifying and so dynamic in Vincent Zhao's own way that I think it deserves so much attention and as much acclaim as possible, and it is a fitting part of this overall cycle of films, this being this work, which is Once Upon a Time in China 4. The Criterion Collection has released this wonderful set, Once Upon a Time in China, the complete films, the Blu-ray set, with Once Upon a Time in China 4 being on the 4th disc of such set. So I should point out that the presentation here is according to Criterion, a new 2K digital restoration of the film. I must admit that my knowledge of past releases, past physical media, non-Criterion releases of Once Upon a Time in China 4 is very, very limited. Because it's not often the case that this film is included. Usually the case has been that Once Upon a Time in China has been marketed as a type of trilogy, 1, 2, 3, with Jet Li in the role of Wang Feiheng. So this film usually doesn't get a lot of release treatment history discussion, at least as far as my own limited knowledge is concerned. So it's hard to maybe make some good comparisons with past releases. But in any event, what we are getting here is a 2K digital restoration, and it looks and it sounds great. And speaking of the sound, I should point out this has the Cantonese mono soundtrack. There doesn't seem to be any other options as far as other languages are concerned, but for me that's okay because it's wonderful to watch this film with the Cantonese language soundtrack, and it sounds great and it looks really great. It looks much better than any version I've seen this film in prior to this. So this is a welcome inclusion and addition to this particular set, and indeed to the Criterion Collection. I'm so impressed, not just with the presentation here, but in fact with the inclusion of this film. This bears repeating, which is the great strength of the Criterion set, I think, as worded so eloquently by Tony Raines in the first disc's supplement interview with him, what this Criterion set does is it essentially calibrates or recalibrates one's viewpoint of the Once Upon a Time in China film series, not in terms of a trilogy, but in terms of a 5-part or indeed 6-part cycle of films. And so included in which, therefore, is part 4. So this is a very, very important and welcome kind of recalibration or revisitation or celebration of the legacy of these films. So the inclusion itself is cause for celebration indeed. And I truly believe that. And the presentation is wonderful and it sounds wonderful. So this is really, really great. Now, with that being said, perhaps another weakness that one could identify in terms of the way in which the Criterion Collection set is handling this particular cycle of films is that we don't get that many supplements per se that could be said to be directly talking about Once Upon a Time in China 4 on this 4th disc. There is a really great set of supplements, and I'll talk about that momentarily. But we don't get anything, for instance, we don't get any Part 4 specific discussion. We do get a little bit of Part 4 discussion from, say, Tony Raines on the first disc's interview. But we don't get anything beyond that. And in fact, if you've seen my earlier video discussing the first disc, I made mention of the fact that I love that interview. Don't get me wrong, it's a great interview. But there's one point in the Tony Raines interview where he tries to explain the feeling of a type of when Vincent Zhao emerges as Wang Feihong. For him, it feels very natural. Well, I would actually push back on that point a little bit. In fact, I don't think it feels natural at all. It feels very much like a different version or different portrayal of Wang Feihong, as I tried to point out earlier. It's a great performance, don't get me wrong, but it is noticeably quite different. And so I would have liked to have heard more discussion about Vincent Zhao and what he brings to the table in terms of his own version or his own interpretation of Wang Feihong, because he brings a certain interpretation that is very dynamic and very, very, in a lot of aspects, quite different in a great way from the earlier versions of Wang Feihong. But I would have liked to have heard more about that. But so the point for me bringing that up is, on the one hand, there are points of discussion in, say, other supplements on this set where we talk specifically about Part 4 and Part 5, but not many. And so that makes me look at this and think, oh, it would have been wonderful if, say, there would have been a Part 4-centric supplement. Maybe there could have been a real focus on, say, Yuen Bun and his contribution specifically, or maybe some discussions, more specific discussions as to why Jet Li didn't appear in this or Part 5. What was the thinking behind the inclusion of 14th Aunt? If there had been a commentary track option available here as well, wow, could you imagine that? That could have been really exciting, really interesting to dig in deep into some of these details. Some of the fight choreography set pieces are really dynamic and splendid, so to get more information about how those were put together, etc. And dealing with history, dealing with elements of, as I say, Boxer Rebellion, Eight Nation Alliance, etc. So that would have been really welcome information. Unfortunately, we don't get any of that, at least in the context of this physical media release, directly anyway. So if you are interested in that type of stuff, you might have to look elsewhere. But I do want to emphasize that despite certain, say, misgivings that one might have as a consumer of this type of product, at the same time, there is no denying the wonderful thing that is the inclusion of this film and the treatment of this film in the context of this box set, and how it is in that treatment or in that inclusion essentially saying that this film, Part 4, is a worthy member of this whole cycle of films, this universe of films known as, in English, Once Upon a Time in China. So that alone is, in my view, worth the price of admission, that's for sure. And to have this film included in this set, wow. And what Tony Raines does so well in that first disc interview is that he really makes the case for saying that this is a cycle of films. This is not just a trilogy. It is a cycle of films. Therefore, Part 4 is so important in terms of the evolving thematic concern and those thematic discussions that started all the way from part one and kept building and building and building. Part 4 is part of that conversation directly. So while there might be certain misgivings, the fact that it's included here is cause for celebration. Now, as far as the 4th disc's supplements are concerned, we don't have that many in terms of quantity, but please note that they are really interesting what they are. So the first of the supplements is referred to as Double Action, and this is described as being from 2021. And this is a one-on-one conversation interview with the editor, Marco Mac Chishin. So Marco Mac is speaking to us in this interview, approximately 12 minutes. This is wonderful. This could be described as being not necessarily part 4 centric, but it's maybe just talking about the cycle of films overall, giving certain aspects to how action was edited. Of course, he has a role, a very direct role in terms of his work on part 4. So this is, of course, maybe not necessarily part 4 centric, but it is relevant to the discussion of part 4 as well as to other films. So he's talking here about, for instance, how action is edited in his hands, the idea of repetition of frames, which is an interesting technique in order to preserve a sense of, say, information on the part of the viewer, in order to have the viewer be able to understand with more clarity what indeed is going on because of the quickness and the really quick flash nature of the agile action scene. Sometimes a lot can be lost, and so, for instance, the repeated frame technique can really help not just to emphasize action, but also help the viewer to retain certain information about what's going on within the physical space of the particular scene. So this is very important. Also, there's this idea of shooting second unit experience that he mentions. Also, the idea of shooting master shots in terms of working with Choi Hak and others. Master shots were always treated, at least as he explains it, like a rehearsal, which is an interesting concept because, as we know, master shots are then they are edited with certain close-ups or other angle shots, etc. So we have a master shot and we have certain edited viewpoints, different angles that form once the editing process is completed, one full scene, etc. So it's interesting to hear his take about Choi Hak and his approach to master shots, etc. This is perhaps maybe an indication of how this conversation is, again, not necessarily part 4 centered, but just talking about the cycle of films overall. And also, I should point out his idea or approach about looking at this series of films and seeing certain influences that Choi Hak and others might have taken from other works. For instance, Marco Mac cites Japanese cinema, Akira Kurosawa. He cites specifically the work Yojimbo, which is very close to my own heart. I love the work Yojimbo, and the fact that he quotes it here made me so happy. I was just thrilled to bits when I heard this particular moment. So it was lovely to hear that. Also, there's a really interesting a comment that the editor makes here, because if you recall, going back to the first film and Jet Li, up to that point, the character of Wang Fei-hung had been portrayed by a number of actors, but Jet Li was really bringing something new, very revolutionary in a lot of ways in terms of the depictions, the cinematic depictions of Wang Fei-hung. So Marco Mac here indicates that during the shooting or during the production, he wasn't necessarily convinced from the outset anyway that Jet Li could really be a Wang Fei-hung, because as we know, Wang Fei-hung was a character, or was a figure, kind of legendary icon that was portrayed very, very prominently by Kwon Tak-hing. So, and the type of physicality is quite different in terms of what Jet Li brings. And so Marco Mac indicates that he wasn't quite convinced until close to the end of shooting, and then he realized that Jet Li was really bringing so much to the role of Wang Fei-hung. It's really interesting that he mentions this. Again, it would have been, this is just talking overall about the dynamic, and it just shows the way in which this film series was really revolutionary in a lot of ways, not least of which being the fact that it was bringing a new interpretation of the Wang Fei-hung legend that started in the cycle of films anyway, with the performance by Jet Li, and then continued on with, I think, such a great voice and dynamism in the hands of Vincent Zhao. So this is a great conversation with another really key participant to the process. So please check it out if you can. It's approximately 12 minutes. And then the second supplement here is the trailer. It's approximately 2 minutes. It's in English, which is an interesting aspect, and so you can watch that. But it's a very entertaining trailer, as most of the trailers are. So please check that out if you can. So, my friends, that's it as far as the supplements are concerned. So I return to my earlier comment about it would have been nice to have more supplements, maybe part 4-centric specific supplements. A commentary track would have been nice, of course. And so one might see, or there could be the possibility that one might look at that particular component of the set and see that certain aspects are lacking. And if you feel that way, that is completely fair and valid. I think that's a very fair criticism to make. However, I would just return to the point that we have the film itself here. Really important, and it's presented so well. And it's wonderful to have it as part of this set. Once Upon a Time in China. Once again, Criterion does its best and makes a great argument to essentially recalibrate the series to include 4 and 5, and indeed 6. And so in that discussion, we have been talking about this wonderful film, again from 1993, Yuen Bun as director, with Vincent Zhao as Wang Feihong. This is the work Once Upon a Time in China 4. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.